Thanks for tuning into this podcast. If you appreciate the news that Rebel brings you, consider being a part of what makes it possible. You can do so by subscribing to our exclusive content at rebelnewsplus.com. That means get exclusive shows, documentary, behind the scenes, and more. And it's for a cheap price as low as $8 to start. We appreciate your support.
An investigation into the US Congressional inquiry into whether or not Mark Carney's environmental group committed extortion in the United States, a kind of cartel mob-style shakedown. Well, I'll show you what the congressional investigation says, and I'll show you rather incredible revelations from Carney himself, including stating in an interrogation that he is a British resident. This is just a few months ago. He said he's from Britain, not Canada. I'll show you all that. Boy, you'll want to see it with your own eyes, which is why I encourage you to get the video version of this podcast. Go to rebelnewsplus.com, click subscribe. It's $8 a month, and not only do you get the video version, which is, you put a lot of video elements into these podcasts, but you get the satisfaction of knowing that you're keeping Rebel News strong, because $8 might not be a lot of money to you, but it sure adds up for us because we don't take any money from Trudeau, and it shows. Hey, one more thing.
Hey there, Rebel News listeners. Do you have a business or cause that you want to promote to the tens of thousands of regular Rebel News viewers? Now's your chance. Whether it's ads on podcasts like this one, videos, our website, or even our digital billboard truck, Rebel News has your advertising needs covered. It's easy to get started. Just head over to rebelnews.com/advertise. That's rebelnews.com/advertise. Fill out our form and find out how Rebel News can help spread your message today. Don't wait. Advertise with Rebel News, reach freedom-loving patriots, and support our independent journalism.
You're listening to a Rebel News podcast.
Tonight, serious questions are being asked by the US Congress. Did Mark Carney engage in extortion towards U.S. oil and gas companies? It's March 26th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
Mark Carney is being very sketchy about his vast wealth and how he got it. I have nothing against vast wealth. I do have a few questions about how Carney could have amassed such wealth while working for the Bank of England and then the United Nations and then as an economic advisor to Justin Trudeau for 5 years. Seems like it would be a real conflict of interest to have an inside track on so many government plans while also running a major company called Brookfield, which is like a smaller version of BlackRock, making huge investments, making divestments, moving capital around, picking winners and losers. You know, it's one thing to do those challenging tasks if you're in the dog-eat-dog world of capitalism. But what if you have sort of a secret cheat code that you literally know what the Prime Minister of Canada is going to do, what he's going to say, what's going to be in the upcoming budget? Because not only does he tell you, but he asks you, because you're a special economic advisor. How can you at the same time do business in Canada, as Brookfield did, and with the government of Canada when you have the government's secret plans? Same with his ongoing relationship with the British government and the United Nations. It's possible to get rich running a massive investment fund. It's inevitable to get rich running a massive investment fund if you get to shape the government rules under which you operate. That is the definition of a conflict of interest, which is why I think Carney was so touchy when he was asked a week or so ago about whether or not he's going to disclose just what his current assets are. What companies does he own? Does he own foreign companies that are competitors to Canadian companies? Has he invested, say, in green tech companies, windmills, solar, electrical vehicles, that sort of thing? It seems pretty certain that he has. That's been his focus for a decade. He won't tell us, though, and he won't sell his stock. How can he be prime minister making decisions about those very things while having those stocks?
I've more than complied with all the rules, and I've more than complied with all the rules in advance, well in advance, months and months in advance of the requirements that were set up and that currently operate. By the way, requirements that Mr. Poilievre voted for when he was part of Mr. Harper's government. That's the first thing. The second is that I have divested all my assets, with the exception of cash and personal real estate, house and a cottage, into the blind trust, as is the route. It's a blind trust. I can't, what that means for those who don't follow this, I have no control over it anymore. It's a blind trust. I have no control. I cannot divest anything from it. I can't change that. The trustee manages it accordingly. I have set up screens for Brookfield and a company called Stripe that I used to be on the board of. I've set those screens up already well in advance. They'll be administered by the clerk of the Privy Council and the Chief of Staff. And as well, I have already filed months and months and months and months in advance with the Ethics Commissioner, all the detail of when the divestitures happen, all the details of those assets. So again, I've complied with all the aspects. I've over-complied, in fact, well in advance, and this is the system we have, and I'm proud that we have it because it draws a sharp contrast with what other countries have.
But that's not being honest. He knew exactly what stocks he just put into that blind trust. It would be like if Elon Musk were to put his stocks into a blind trust. Well, everyone would know he still has Tesla and SpaceX and Starlink. It would be absurd to pretend that he didn't. Now, right now, Elon Musk is in charge of cutting government waste in contracts. Obviously, he couldn't be put in charge of NASA or automobile policy. He'd have to sell his stock first. That's actually what Trump's cryptocurrency czar did when he was appointed. David Sachs is his name. He literally sold all of his cryptocurrency before he took the job of cryptocurrency czar. Take a look.
I sold all my cryptocurrency prior to day one of the administration because I didn't want to even have the appearance of a conflict. And by the way, I could have waited. I didn't have to do it like that, but I decided to do it and take it upon myself to do that because you just know that when it comes to crypto, there's going to be a lot of fluctuations in the market. You never want someone to be able to point at one of those fluctuations and say somehow that the cryptos are benefited from that and create a conspiracy theory, which is exactly what basically happened. So first of all, I got rid of all my cryptocurrency prior to day one. Kraft also sold all.
And Kraft is the venture firm that you funded that's done a lot of great work supporting founders here in Silicon Valley.
So we basically sold, I think it was around $200 million of crypto, of which around $85 million was personally attributable to myself. And we cleared that before day one, paid taxes on it, and basically so there wouldn't be a conflict.
I think he probably gave up $1 billion worth of likely profits just to take the job. That's principles. What a different mentality Mark Carney has. He refuses to sell. He refuses to put Canada first, and he takes umbrage at being asked about his wealth by the peasants. Mark Carney has a new answer now. Bizarrely, he says he's only got some real estate or something. What do you make of this?
I own nothing now. I came into public life at a time of crisis. I put my hand up because of the crisis, because of what's represented by that bridge, what's represented by the threats to these good men and women of Unifor and their colleagues across southwestern Ontario and across Canada. I came in. What I've done is put all my affairs in order well in advance. I own nothing but cash and personal real estate. So, and that's not going to change in public life. That's not going to change. It's actually quite straightforward.
So then, just to be clear, then going forward, you have no potential equity stake, no potential stock options, or any other potential future payments that you currently anticipate could come from either Strike or Brookfield.
So what I have is cash, personal real estate, and their assets all those assets were divested into a blind trust, which is managed by a trustee. And it literally means exactly what it says. I don't know what's in it.
Yeah, his story keeps changing. It's happening a lot with Mark Carney, isn't it? But today I want to talk about something very different, something very surprising that I haven't seen the mainstream media talk about a lot. Mark Carney is being investigated by the US Congress for participating in mafia-style conduct. They use the word cartel, collusion, shaking down corporations, essentially extorting them to follow Carney's extremist green policies. Now, I mentioned yesterday something called GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. It's just an awful name, I think on purpose to make people bored and not look into it anymore. Carney is obsessed with net zero, and he's bet billions on it. He's also made it Canada's policy to bet billions or tens of billions on it through his advice to Justin Trudeau. Part of that is shutting down the oil sands and coal. He calls that a transition. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, is an independent, private sector-led initiative focusing on mobilizing capital and removing barriers to investment in the global transition. It really is opaque. But what if people don't want to go along with that transition, which basically means shutting down oil and gas and coal? What if people have realized that if you just build wind turbines and solar panels, they don't work reliably. They don't work when it's dark or when it's not windy or when it's too windy. That they need a backup in the form of reliable energy like coal or natural gas or nuclear. What if people have realized that these new forms of energy are extremely expensive and that they're leading to energy poverty? That's obviously hard on individuals like pensioners, but it's hard on industry too. A major reason why, for example, steel companies have left the UK. You need a lot of electricity for steel and aluminum factories. You just can't compete with China and India and South Korea if you're obsessed with net zero, taking your own country's carbon use down to zero. You can't do it. And I mentioned the UK because that's where Mark Carney really got revved up about this stuff. But here's what's new, or at least new to me. Here's what's shocking, or at least shocking to me. The way that Mark Carney has gone about pushing net zero on companies has involved threats. The same way a cartel would make threats, a shakedown, like a mafia hit. Again, that word cartel, like a drug cartel. And while Mark Carney was actually an advisor to the Canadian government for years, he was being investigated at the same time by the US government just last year, just a few months ago. Now, here's Thomas Massey, a congressman from Kentucky. This was just last year. I'm going to play a 4-minute clip for you, if you don't mind. And the reason I want to play all 4 minutes is that if I cut anything out, I think I'm going to have to just say it again in my own words anyways. And I want you to hear it from the guy who's leading the charge, or one of the guys leading the charge against Massey in Congress. Massey is, as you may know, the most avid small government advocate in the entire Congress. He's pretty much a pure libertarian in my view. Listen to what he says about how GFANZ and net zero types use cartel-like behavior. That's that mafia-style shakedown, not a mafia hit so much as a mafia, a threat to push their ideology into companies instead of having companies follow their lawful mission, which is to promote shareholder value. So watch 4 minutes and watch it through, and then I'll be right back on the other side.
The American economy has grown into the strongest in the world on the foundation of free market capitalism. That's because competition results in lower prices and more and better goods and services for all Americans. As the legendary economist and Nobel laureate Milton Friedman explained, quote, "There has never in history been a more effective machine for eliminating poverty than the free enterprise system and the free market. Collusion, on the other hand, raises prices and reduces both output and consumer choice. Thus, antitrust law aims to protect competition and prohibit collusion. In fact, the Supreme Court has described collusion as, quote, the supreme evil of antitrust. Despite these long-standing economic and legal principles, the climate cartel is engaged in anti-competitive collusion to impose radical environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, goals on the American people. In his testimony to this committee, Andrew Bahar highlighted the 3 C's of collusion. They collaborate, convene, and coordinate. Gee, it's like you wanted to say the word collusion, but you didn't say it, so you asked ChatGPT to give me an alliteration, to go to the thesaurus and find 3 words that are like collusion but not collusion. These were his words: collaborate, convene, and coordinate with other members of the climate cartel to impose their ideological agenda on the American people. This climate cartel consists of left-wing activists, dominant financial institutions, and the groups and initiatives that facilitate the collusion among them. Specifically, groups like Climate Action 100+ expressly require the investors who join them to pressure the companies they invest in to, quote, decarbonize and reach net zero emissions. Asset owners like California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS, and asset managers like Arjuna Capital then use the investments they control to force companies to disclose their carbon emissions, to reduce their carbon emissions, and to adopt governance mechanisms that enforce these commitments, even though these commitments are bad for investors and consumers. The climate cartel engages in a series of escalating pressure tactics to force American companies to act against their own self-interest and adopt its desired left-wing policies. First, the climate cartel leverages its investment holdings to demand meetings with corporate management. If corporations refuse to cave, the climate cartel then escalates to filing shareholder resolutions demanding that companies take action. Groups like Climate Action 100+ then, quote, flag these resolutions, drawing greater attention to them and making them even more effective. If companies still fail to bow to its demands, the climate cartel then seeks to replace members of their boards of directors. Notably, the climate cartel did so at ExxonMobil in 2021, replacing 3 directors with members of its own choosing. The climate cartel's commitment and demands reduce output and raise prices for American consumers. There's no way to reach, quote, net zero without reducing production and diminishing the American standard of living. These negative impacts are especially pronounced in the fossil fuel, aviation, and agricultural sectors. In other words, the very industries that allow Americans to drive, fly, and eat. For example, the climate cartel has said that fossil fuels must, quote, stay in the ground to reduce carbon emissions. Similarly, the climate cartel has called for reducing the number of airplane flights by 12% and capping passenger air travel to 2019 levels. Likewise, the climate cartel has called for cutting American beef consumption roughly in half because, quote, cows are the new coal. This sort of anti-competitive collusion has been illegal under the U.S. antitrust laws for more than a century. Yet the Biden administration has refused to take action to enforce the law and protect American consumers. In today's hearing, we will investigate the climate cartel, its anti-competitive collusion, and the harm it continues to inflict on the American economy and people.
That's the truth about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. He's talking about corporations replacing their duty to shareholders, which is to make the company worth more. That's the job of a company. He wants to replace it with a socialist, environmentalist ideology. That's what Mark Carney wants to do. That's what G-fans want to do. That's what ESG wants to do. And that's why Thomas Massie is worried. It's a violation of what's called the fiduciary duty. The president of a publicly traded company cannot act like he owns the company himself. He can't loot it for himself. He can't take the money for himself or make it run his personal errands, obviously. But it's no different if he takes the money or directs the company to follow his own ideological whims, his own politics, as opposed to running the company for the benefit of shareholders. That's what ESG really is. I showed you last night when I put that question to a head of a massive asset management company called State Street. I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I bumped into the boss of State Street, and I asked him about ESG, and State Street is deep into it. I was so surprised. He was obviously a bit panicked by politicians and attorneys general poking around at the kind of extortion and shakedowns going on in the name of environmentalism. I mean, a whole bunch of states are divesting, not just because it's bad business to invest in an ESG kind of company, but because you're sacrificing a rate of return for ideology, but it's a kind of extortion. Make these environmentalist commitments or else we'll wreck your company, or else we'll get investors to bail on you. That's the extortionate behavior that Thomas Massie is talking about. A threat, a cartel, a mafia style, no, nice company you got here. Shame if anything would happen to it. And that's why, let me show you this headline. I missed this. This is a headline from just 4 months ago. I guess we were all busy. Look at the date on it. This was November. I was busy thinking about Trump's tariffs. I was following Trump's announcement from Mar-a-Lago, but look at this. Let me read the story a little bit from Axios. 11 states sue biggest money managers over alleged coal collusion. Let me read a little bit. I'm going to read a few excerpts. A group of 11 states, led by Texas, sued some of the world's biggest money managers, alleging they illegally colluded to drive down the supply of coal and drive up the price of electricity. The suit against BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, filed in an East Texas federal court, alleges the money managers rolled up huge stakes in coal companies and then worked together to advance environmental initiatives that meant producing less coal. Isn't that a weird thing to do? All three firms have participated in initiatives to gather money managers and use their influence to drive environmental policy. Vanguard was previously a member of the Net Zero Asset Managers, formed to push for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. It left NZAM in 2022 amid pressure on money managers over ESG investing. State Street and BlackRock remain signatories. BlackRock's international unit is also part of Climate Action 100 Plus, a similar initiative after the parent company pulled out and transferred the participation earlier this year. State Street pulled out of CA 100 Plus earlier this year as well. So these are all the groups that Mark Carney lobbies, that he's part of, that he pushes. That's what this whole G-Fans thing is. That's why the State Street boss was so agitated when I asked him about ESG in Davos the other year.
Can I ask you a little bit about State Street and ESG? Are you pulling back from it the same way BlackRock is?
No. And why don't we just set this up formally? But no, we're not pulling back from it.
Well, what about critics like Elon Musk who say it's a kind of reverse racism?
Elon's got his opinion.
What about shareholders who say you're putting other goals ahead of your fiduciary duties? You're putting cultural Marxism or affirmative action. Those may be political values, but they're not designed to get a maximum rate of return.
If there's firms that are doing that, I don't know that. That's not how we do it. We have one focus, which is shareholder value, period.
Well, then how, you just told me, though, you're sticking with ESG.
We stick with value. It's about value, not values.
Can I ask you about state governments that are pulling their funds out of ESG firms, like the state of Florida, for example? Are you worried that State Street will be hit by divestment from companies that are rejecting ESG?
So we only focus on creating value for our shareholders, and if you look at our track record, that's all that we've ever done. And what we focus on is what do long-term investors need to be thinking about? What are the kinds of risks they need to be thinking about? And they need to make the decision. That's what we've always done.
What were your goals? What are your goals here?
I'm done.
Okay.
And I think that's the question that really miffed Larry Fink from BlackRock. Though he didn't answer any of my questions, he hated that one when I put it to him a few months ago.
Mr. Fink, are you going to follow Donald Trump's plan and get rid of DEI and ESG in your companies? BlackRock really is the opposite of Donald Trump in so many ways. You're authoritarian, you're anti-populist, you're top-down. Are you going to change it all in light of the U.S. presidency? How is Donald Trump, have you talked to Donald Trump since he was elected? Is the World Economic Forum a counterpoint to Donald Trump? Why are you running away from simple questions? Just answer a question. Have you talked to President Trump yet?
All right, so back to our man, Mark Carney. I want to read to you some of the research put together by David Clement at the Consumer Choice Center for this. I'm going to read to you a number of his posts on the subject, so thanks to him for doing the work. On April 17th, 2024, so less than a year ago, Mark Carney, in his capacity as the co-chair of GFANS, was deposed by staff members of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee in their investigation into corporation adoption and imposition of ESG. Here are some takeaways. Did you know that? Did you know that Carney was deposed by Department of Justice lawyers? They reported every time Donald Trump farted, but they don't tell you that Mark Carney was grilled by Judiciary Committee lawyers. That's interesting. I didn't know about that. Let me read some more. From the same Twitter thread, Carney's role as a UN climate finance envoy and GFAN's co-chair was predicated on ensuring the firms would commit to net zero policies to effectively decarbonize. He was active in pushing carbon markets, putting a price on carbon emissions as a measurement of whether firms were adhering to the Paris climate goals. And that's what he's going to do to Canada, by the way. His stated goal was to, quote, develop a common approach for transition plans for financial institutions. And the critical thing that does is it incentivizes the financial institution to do what they do best, which is to think about, if I am funding either through an investment or lending, a reduction in emissions, I'm taking a view on whether that will be successful. Now, I should tell you, this wasn't the normal, regular congressional testimony in an open forum where congressmen ask questions and they do a little grandstanding for the cameras. It wasn't that. I've actually participated in that. That's really fun. He was being deposed by staff lawyers. This is a serious business. They were investigating him for illegal practices. Did you know that about your new prime minister? Look at this part, thanks to David Clement. He reveals his role in pressuring financial institutions to limit lending and funding of both capital and assets if they do not strictly adhere to the goal of limiting climate emissions. He agrees with the statement that, quote, more than half of the world's coal reserves need to stay in the ground in order for the world to be in line with Paris climate accords. This is what they mean when they mean transition off oil, off coal, off gas. This is what net zero means. Stopping the economy, leaving it in the ground, just stopping coal mines, stopping oil sands. He would do that by forcing them to stop by a kind of financial blackmail. As a UN official, as Trudeau's advisor, as the chairman of Brookfield Asset Management, and now as prime minister, he is in a war, a jihad. He's so obsessed with it, it's like a religious crusade for him. He is against carbon. I'll read some more from David Clement. Carney mentions that a company that does not have a transition pathway to decarbonize is on the, quote, wrong side of climate history. He remains adamant that carbon prices are necessary commitments that every country must adopt in order to achieve the goals of net zero. He wants this for every country, but strangely enough, he's never tried to pressure China to do it. That's odd. They're a larger emitter than the rest of the world combined. Maybe that's why China gave Brookfield a $250 million investment last year. I mean, that was really good for Mark Carney, but maybe that's why Mark Carney really lays off China. Maybe that's why Xi Jinping poses for photos with. What does Mark Carney have to say to Xi Jinping? I'd like to know. But this one's a stunner. Look at this. This is very interesting. As of April 2024, less than a year ago, he was not living in Canada. He was living in the UK as an advisor to the Prime Minister of the UK. His words. I didn't know that. I knew he was an advisor to Trudeau. He said in his testimony to these lawyers that he was an advisor to the British PM as well. Oh my God, what a conflict of interest. Let me read his verbatim testimony. I live in a country, and remember, I'm in the UK. I'm the former governor of the Bank of England. I am the Prime Minister's advisor. It is the law in the United Kingdom to transition to net zero. It is the requirement of the government to come up under law, which has subsequently been litigated and found to bind, to come up with the policies that are consistent with the transition with what the UK has set up. So if you're a company that has decided to just ignore that, well, it looks like you're on the wrong side, at least of climate history in the United Kingdom. Whoa, 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 whoa. So it's true. His own legal testimony less than a year ago was that he was a resident of, that he lived in the UK, that he was a Brit. He said, I just read you his verbatim testimony, that he was an advisor to the government of the United Kingdom, and that leaving carbon in the ground was the law and certainly the moral thing to do. Mark Carney was a British citizen, he is a British citizen, British resident, less than a year ago. When did he move back here? Has he even moved back here? Now, that US Congressional Committee that grilled Carney issued its report. Again, they did so just before Christmas, when the world was paying attention to Trump and his pronouncements from Mar-a-Lago, or at least I was. Few people, I think, caught the importance of this back on December 13th, 2024. I mean, what a terrible time to make an announcement. Everybody's, in politics and journalism at least, are already thinking about Christmas. It was called Sustainability Shakedown. How a climate cartel of money managers colluded to take over the board of America's largest energy company. Interim staff report of the Committee of the Judiciary, U.S. House of Representatives. Can I read the first 200 words from the executive summary to you? It sums it up, and wait for that funny word, G-fans. So can you give me 2 minutes? I want to read it to you. In U.S. antitrust law, competition is always favored over collusion. The largest money managers, however powerful they may be, cannot collude to, quote, preempt the working of the market by deciding for themselves that customers do not need that which they demand. This is especially true when their conspiracy shrinks the production of the affordable energy products relied upon by millions of Americans. The Committee on the Judiciary is entrusted with, quote, the protection of trade and commerce against unlawful restraints and monopolies, including anti-competitive agreements that restrict products available to American consumers. In the 118th Congress, the committee has investigated the adequacy of U.S. antitrust laws in light of increasing commitments among left-wing environmental activists and major institutional investors to impose environmental, social, and governance ESG goals on the U.S. economy. The committee's oversight has revealed substantial evidence that a, quote, climate cartel of big institutions, from the big three asset managers to blue state public pensions to the proxy advisor duopoly, collude to pressure American businesses to commit to, quote, net zero and scale down disfavored production through climate coalitions, including the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative, Ceres, and Climate Action 100+. Investors form coordinated pressure campaigns to target U.S. companies and demand that they disclose, reduce, and enforce net zero climate commitments. When companies refuse to surrender and comply, the climate cartel colludes to fire company board members and replace them with climate cartel-aligned members. Okay, I'm going to stop there. But let me skip ahead to the very end of the summary and read what this looks like in real time. What does it mean to threaten and extort and collude and join together to compel a company to do something contrary to their legal duties? Well, this congressional investigation focused on how Mark Carney's group, along with the others, along with BlackRock and State Street, went to war against ExxonMobil. That's America's largest oil company that also happens to own Canada's large oil company, Imperial Oil. So let me read a little bit here. Before the ExxonMobil board refreshment, that's what they're calling it when these climate extremists burrow into ExxonMobil, the climate cartel threatened BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors to join Climate Action 100+ after the asset managers initially refused to join Climate Action because they were, quote, concerned with collusion and believed that, quote, engaging alongside other investors may trigger regulatory issues. 26 climate cartel members threatened to pull multi-billion-dollar contracts, which led BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors to join the initiative and its pressure campaign against ExxonMobil. So they knew it was against the law, but they didn't want to lose billions of dollars. So they went to war against Exxon. If they can roll Exxon, they can roll anyone. Now, look, I'm all for shareholders expressing themselves. I really am. And if investors want to take their own money and invest it in a weird way, a way besides making profit, well, good for them. I don't care. I mean, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, now it's owned by Unilever, one of the world's largest conglomerate, $200 billion Canadian. But, I mean, they sold out to get rich, of course. But when they were small, being left-wing snobs was part of the brand. It was one of the things that they were actually selling to their customers, that snob appeal. That's fine. Why would I be against that? It's their own money. Shareholders can do with their money what they want. Customers can do with their money what they want. But that's the thing about BlackRock and State Street and Mark Carney's Brookfield and GFANZ. They're not using their own money. They're using investors' money as a battering ram against the companies themselves. They're not pushing for more profits. They're not pushing for a company to be more efficient. They're not reining in waste within the company or a CEO misusing perks like a private jet or whatever. They're not acting in the interests of the shareholders at all. They're putting their own personal politics first. They're hijacking their investors' money and using their investors' money to push for their own agendas. That's a kind of theft. But this report from Congress shows it's worse than that. That's ESG no matter what. But this whole investigation is about extortion. These companies, including Mark Carney's GFANs, engaged in extortion to do it. As Massey called it, a cartel. And they take that seriously in America. Mark Carney's GFANs cartel is one of the major focuses of this congressional investigation. They accused him of operating illegally, contrary to the law, to extort outcomes from companies. And believe me, Mark Carney is profiting every which way he can from all of this. And now he's prime minister. No election, no parliament. He just parachuted in, and he's not going to sell his holdings. Isn't that weird? Why would he? He knows how to make a killing by pressuring companies to do what he wants, by being an advisor to the UN, advisor to the British PM, an advisor to the Canadian PM, and then using that access as a battering ram too. He's not actually a businessman. He's never run a business in his life. He's a shakedown expert. He's an extortion expert. And isn't it strange? It was in his deposition that we learned that he considers himself a Brit, without question. Just a few months ago, you heard him. He lives in the United Kingdom. Well, now he lives here, I think, and he and his cartel are coming for you. Say, do you think that maybe, just maybe, we should vet this guy before he takes over everything? Stay with us for more. For those of you who remember my life as a broadcaster before Rebel News, you'll remember that I was with the Sun News Network, and that's where we first tried out different projects involving crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, events. And one of the battles we had very early days, and this is more than 10 years ago now, because this was at the Sun News Network, was when we saw that the city of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, their city council ripped up a contract signed with a Christian group that had signed a contract with the Nanaimo Conference Center. It's a neutral building. It's a conference center. Anyone in Nanaimo can rent it. They paid the money. They paid their fee. It was just an ordinary conference. And some anonymous person made a complaint to City Hall about that. And all these aldermen started disparaging Christians in the craziest of ways. And they did this all on camera, by the way. I mean, they're so proud of their City Hall that they televised their proceedings, which is how I learned about this. And they were comparing Christians to Boko Haram, the terrorist group in Nigeria, and they were saying they were crazy and dangerous. So they ripped up the contract, and they were sort of narrating their human rights abuse in real time. So Rebel News, well, we weren't around then, so then it was Sun News Network. We jumped on the case, and we went to work in Nanaimo. We had public meetings. We had rallies. We did an opinion poll, and we got behind the one alderman on city council who was not anti-Christian. It was an election year. The bad guys were thrown out. The guy we backed became mayor. The mayor who presided over the anti-Christian bigotry, he came in third. It was so exciting. We really helped free Nanaimo from a crooked group of bigots. And we practiced a lot of the things that we use all the time now at Rebel News: crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, citizen journalism. It was sort of a prototype of what was to come. I wasn't quite sure where it would go back then. I think this is 2014 now I'm talking about. Well, here we are, 2025, and we're giving her every day. We're in battles like that every day. But my point of telling that story is not just to share a little story with you, but to reminisce about Nanaimo, which is a lovely city on Vancouver Island, and I used to go there quite often. And so what a delight today to introduce to you the latest person to join our merry band of rebels, and she is lucky enough to live in Nanaimo, one of my favorite places. Please join me in welcoming Katrina Panova. Katrina, great to see you again. You're known online as Cat Canada, and now you're a rebel.
Yes, thank you for having me, Ezra. It's always an honor to join you on your show, and I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the efforts of Rebel News and for Canada for the project that's ahead of us.
Well, thanks very much. As our viewers know, because we've only announced this a couple days ago, we set up that third-party campaign group because Elections Canada demanded we did. As you know, Elections Canada prosecuted me when I published my book, The Libranos. They said it was a campaign expense. I said, no, it's not. It's a book. And they went after the lawn signs as well, saying that's an illegal promotion of the book. I said, that's all allowed. I was convicted. And so, you know what? We did try fighting it for 5 years in court. But in the end, I didn't win. So I don't want to be charged again with partisan conduct. So we've set up this, it's actually in my own name. It's called For Canada. So it's a separate thing from Rebel News. It has its own bank account, its own stuff. And we're going to put the partisan stuff in there so we don't get in trouble. And I if that sounds too shy or deferential, it's really my goal is to avoid being just crushed by Elections Canada. And I've discovered that it's a really fun way of participating in an election too. So Kat, one of your projects is to work with Rebel News in general, but also to help provide services for Canada. That's the third party group, tweeting, circulating videos. Really, we're in a campaign, aren't we?
Yes, Ezra, we certainly are. And once again, I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute to that because it's something that I do as a hobby, basically. It's a passion of mine to fight for this country, to fight for the freedoms in our country, to not let it fall into the hands of the likes of, WEF globalist bankster types like Carney. And so when I was given this opportunity to join, it was just such a resounding yes for me because as Daniel Smith said, this is an election of our lifetime. And I feel like this is one last chance that we have to save this country and to return it to a safe, prosperous Canada that we all once knew and loved. And I want to bring that back. And I want to pour my heart and soul into this so that my children and everyone's children have a bright future in Canada.
Well, that's amazing. And it shows every day. I'm a fan of your work. I followed you on X or Twitter, as it used to be called, for years. And one of the things you've told me, in fact, we were talking on the phone yesterday, one of the things you said to me was that your belief in freedom was informed by the fact that when you were a little girl, you actually were born and grew up in the former Soviet Union. So you know what it's like to come from a place that's with an authoritarian government, without privacy, without civil liberties, where the government was large and abusive. Maybe talk for a minute about that. And it's my observation from the pandemic and the lockdowns that the people who were most alert and alive to the risk were people who had more recently come from the Eastern Bloc, because within their lifetimes they could remember authoritarianism.
Yes, that's right. I come from Soviet Union. I grew up there. I was 11 years old when my family basically sold everything they owned in an attempt to bring us to a country that's free and democratic like Canada. And I may have been young when I was there, but I've pressed my mom for all the stories that she could remember and tell me about what it was like living in a communist tyrannical country like the Soviet Union, where there is no freedom of the press, no freedom of speech. Everything was a deficit. Basic necessities, food items, clothing, etc., you name it. And people were living, in a very demoralized situation. And so when the pandemic hit and I started to see similar policies coming down from our government, from this liberal government that resembled policies and things that the communist Soviet Union did, I was sounding the alarm bells like crazy to anyone who would listen. I got on social media. We were all locked down during the lockdowns. And so I had time on my hands and I was just trying to push out as much information about that as possible, because it was really worrying to see the censorship and the tyranny that was being foisted upon us by the liberal government. So it was very worrisome to see. And that's when I was following your work closely as well, because you guys were doing amazing work. You received a lot of trouble from authorities for it. I remember seeing police raids, etc. That was scary to witness. I could hardly believe that that's what was happening in front of my eyes in a country that my parents gave up everything for to bring us here, only to watch our freedoms basically dissolve because there was a flu going around.
Yeah.
And I certainly also received a lot of flack for it. I was called every name in the book. I was called a tinfoil hatter, a nut job for trying to sound the alarm bells, but I could not stay silent because I'm a mother of 2 children now. And I wanted to know that I've done and said everything I could to make sure that this doesn't happen permanently in this country. I want to live in a free country, not a tyrannical one.
Well, that's music to my ears, and that really is our core belief. At the end of every one of my shows, I say, keep fighting for freedom. And it's more than just a tagline. It's how I would summarize the central belief system at Rebel News. I mean, we believe in other more specific policies, but in terms of, if I had to sum up our philosophy, it's freedom. And so we're so glad to have you join us. A lot of your work is sort of behind the scenes, or when you yourself are not the star. You're a social media guru. You're working on tweets and memes. But I'm hoping that from time to time, you'll take a microphone and go out into the world. I mentioned Nanaimo. I started with a little anecdote about our campaign there. I understand, for example, that the Conservative Party campaign is coming out to Nanaimo on Friday, and it's really fun to go out to record a rally, but also to do what we call streeters, or man on the street interviews, just asking people why you're here. And the reason I love streeters is they're fun and they're sort of easy to do, frankly, but you never know what you're going to get. You never know. You can't, sometimes you sort of think, oh, I know what this guy's going to say, but so often you're completely surprised. Someone might look like they're a real lefty, but actually they've got a great freedom-oriented story. And you're out in the world and it's all spontaneous. To me, streeters are super fun. David Menzies is the king of streeters. And so there are some big shoes to fill. But I hope that from time to time on Vancouver Island, when there are things near or in Nanaimo, that you'll be our feet on the ground. We have Drea Humphrey, who's on the mainland, but of course, it's a couple hours by ferry to get across. So hopefully you'll be able to fly the flag a little bit. And I think you'll get a lot of positive reaction. David was telling me about when he was at the Conservative rally. He said that dozens, maybe even hundreds of people came up to him for selfies and to say hi. Obviously, David's a character, but it's also the Rebel News brand. People know that we're on their side. So I'm hoping you'll be a great part of the team. I know you will, because I've been following your work online for years. And I just thought I'd take a minute to introduce you more formally. I know we've talked before, but to our Rebel viewers, and to let them know that you're joining us pretty much full time right now, and perfect timing because of the campaign. Last word to you, Kat.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ezra. I appreciate the introduction. It really means a lot. It's an honor to be here. And yes, to stretch my legs a bit and to do something that I don't typically do, which is streeters, would be amazing. I've been wanting to do something more, and in addition to what I already do, which is, like you said, mostly behind social media stuff. So I'm really excited to do that. And I've had a chance to ask Pierre Poilievre a question once. It'll be fun to do that again, and to participate in all the election goings on that are happening in and around Nanaimo. I'm honored to contribute my efforts to this.
Well, you're very kind. Obviously, your obligations to your family comes first. I know you got a couple of kids. One of our teammates, Tamara, has 5 kids. Sheila's got 3. Drea's got kids. So there's a lot. And obviously, that comes first. So obviously, you have obligations there. But it's my hope that with a little bit of notice, you can head out into the world. And I would love to see you put questions to Pierre Poilievre, not just because I want to know what he thinks, but I think a well-crafted question put to Pierre Poilievre and his answer can actually shift the coverage. We've seen that already. The other day, Alexa Lavoie asked Pierre Poilievre about if the Liberal contest itself might be rigged, because who were the 250,000 voters who were disqualified? Is it really likely that, Karina Gould and Chrystia Freeland only got less than 200 votes in their own districts? Putting that controversial question to Pierre Poilievre and having him answer it turned it into news that other people talked about. It was a really fun thing. So coming up with thoughtful questions, they really try and keep us out of Mark Carney events, and I don't know our likelihood of getting into those. He will come to Vancouver Island, and I hope you'll give it a shot. But even putting questions to Pierre Poilievre can change the course of the campaign. Anyways, we'll talk more in the weeks ahead. It's great to have you on the team. Thanks for taking the time to join the show, and good luck out there on Vancouver Island. It's a beautiful place in the country.
Thanks for having me, Ezra.
Our pleasure. There you have it, Katrina Panova, the latest rebel. Stay with us. Your letters to me next. Hey, welcome back. Your letters to me. Mick This says, elbows up. Justin Trudeau had this in his little mind when he used his elbow on a female colleague in the House of Parliament. He intentionally wanted to physically hurt her. Very low class. Let's go, Pierre. Let's go, Barbara. Yeah, I forgot about that moment until you reminded me. Justin Trudeau is not afraid to get handsy, to elbow people, to grope people. Ask Rose Knight. He sexually assaulted her in Creston, BC. And I hate to say it, Justin Trudeau learned that from his father, Pierre Trudeau, who beat Margaret Trudeau. That's not a rumor. Margaret Trudeau herself talks about it. Daisy writes, at least we know which party the oil and gas companies won't be supporting. Well, in Canada, corporations are actually not allowed to donate to political parties. Now, they could, I suppose, set up a third-party campaign group, but I don't know of any oil companies that do. Michael Matthias says, let me guess, once these pirates crash the fuel industry, they will buy it up and sell the fuel abroad at significant profit. See, now you're thinking like Mark Carney. Huh. What do you think of the congressional inquiry I took you through a little bit today? Pretty incredible, eh? That's our show for today. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.